In today's world of gaming, mixing genre is not uncommon. However, the mix of genres Esports Godfather makes is one I thought I would never have to describe. The game claims it mixes MOBA Simulator, management and deck building. Now on paper, these genres seem rather unlikely to make a good match, and therefore I was a little bit skeptical going into this game. Yet I also couldn't help myself at the same time to feel very intrigued by this mix. I mean, what if it turns out to be good? Management games can be very relaxing, while deck builders can add a nice diversity to it. The MOBA simulator aspect I am not so sure about. Maybe it's just as toxic as what the game genre is known for. Or infamous for, to put it better. Or maybe not, and we can finally enjoy MOBAs without losing our sanity. Yes, that sounds just as impossible as the mix of genres this game promises to make. But hey, there's always a possibility, so let's find out what Esports Godfather has to offer. In Esports Godfather, you set up your esports team and coach and manage players and ultimately aim to become the best team in the world in an unnamed MOBA game. And that's it. Shorter and sweeter it won't get in terms of a sports story. It's just the ultimate underdog story, which is usually very nice and a very inspiring one. It also is just a very clean and easy place to start off your story. However, here, it's also where it more or less ends. Esports Godfather is a simulator game at first, and therefore is a very gameplay heavy game, and barely focuses on or goes in detail about characters, events, or drama, or even any active storyline. Now, if you think that's a shame that the game does this, then you are correct, it is a shame. We have seen some nice and good stories about sports in games. One of the pillars of this channel is Inazuma 11, and there it's shown that an underdog story of starting from nothing and trying to make it to the top can be a great story to follow. However, Esports Godfather makes it very clear what it aims for, and telling a story is not it. That does not mean it's voided from any story aspects. There are many short intermissions in between matches where characters interact with each other. However, these aspects are only presented for gameplay purposes, not to actually tell a story. There is somewhat of character development present in this game, but again, just like the story, it's very gameplay focused. All players have attributes, skills, milestones and so on that show their growth, but I wouldn't call that active growth as a character. The only story and development that is present in that sense is your own stories that you create with the players as you play the game. Think of a watered down version of XCOM 2 where players you recruit and develop do something really good during a match or develop in a certain way on the esports scene. On that front, it does develop the character and makes it memorable, but only to you. And to a degree, I am fine with that. I even added my own little headcanon here and there to some of my players, which did the trick for me just fine and filled in the void of not having a full-fledged story. Yes, it's a shame that we don't have a full-fledged story, but I also didn't mind it as the gameplay was clearly its main focus. What I did mind was the very big inconsistency in this game's art style. This game's art style is all over the place. The normal world seems to be taken over by bean-looking like creatures with very weird holidays. The team members, however, look like humans, but they are generated via AI. And the MOBA heroes have this cubic look that reminded me a lot of Troll. It's just a huge mess, and while my headcanon to explain the inconsistency in the art style is that the bean creatures took over the human world and now forces them to play a MOBA against each other until death, is a good explanation why the art style is so inconsistent in this game, it still bothered me quite a bit. Maybe the studio that developed the game was short on money and therefore decided to source things from outside the studio. I mean, look no further than the heroes that they use in the MOBA itself, as they are actually assets from a previous game they developed, which is a clever way to reuse certain assets as a small studio. But the rest, be it AI-generated artwork, intermission pictures, or even the music, it all just felt like they straight up were taken from an asset store. Now, I am not against a small indie dev or studio to find other assets to fill in certain gaps in a game they are trying to make. But the least they could have done was pick similar assets, keeping this jumping from Artstyle to a minimum and less jarring. Now, as I stated at the start, Esports Godfather focuses mostly on gameplay, and thankfully the Artstyle in those moments is the best and the most consistent. And in general, this is where the game truly shines. As stated at the start, the game mixes MOBA Simulator management and deck building. And while again this matchup seems unlikely to work, it actually does work. Work really well even. If you ever played a MOBA, a lot of things will look and sound very familiar as it simulates it very well. From familiar terms used to things like banning heroes or changing game rules, to actually understanding the timing of fights between enemies or boss monsters. There's almost a complete understanding of how a MOBA works, and rarely it misses that mark. Each match you play is note for note a MOBA match, but again, instead of playing an actual MOBA, you are a coach, an observer, a duelist? As your impact on these games is limited by playing cards. You as a coach have to prep and send your players on the field. It's up to them to play and win or lose. Only at certain moments you can make slight course corrections to the flow of the game. Maybe you want the top lane to push. Maybe the bottom lane should focus on the tower, or maybe a group of your players should jump into an active team fight. You can also choose to buff individual players or, more interesting, play hero-specific cards. Just like in actual MOBA or hero shooters, each hero has its own gimmick in how it fights. But as this is a deck builder, these gimmicks are translated into cards, and that is what makes this game's deck building very interesting. Once you have figured it out, because this game is rather unfriendly to get into. Tutorial and all is great, but considering the amount of things that are active in a match, you will still feel very unprepared. Heroes don't get individually explained, so in early game you get into situations where the heroes of the opponents do things that you do not see coming. On top of that, the game itself goes really fast. You don't have an option to slow it down or pause the game and read a card that your opponent plays that you never have seen before. The only thing you can do in this situation is to look it up later after the match or observe its effect and then memorizing it going forward. Therefore, I would say the early game experience feels like sprinting while learning under desperation. The outlook that for me made the early experience better and is a lesson Esports Godfather teaches is that you can create the best deck possible, but that timing and adaptability is more important. You have to play cards in only a handful of intervals on a board where its state, be that location of yours or your opponent's heroes, or even the objective itself, constantly changes. Having a combo deck is great, but bullying the bottom lane heroes with it constantly won't win you most matches. And even if it does for a moment, who says it will for a longer period of time? There's never a guarantee that you will be playing the same team of heroes every single match. The opponent can just ban it for the next match or just decide to play said hero themselves. Or worse, even if you get the heroes you want that create this amazing combo, bad RNG can keep you from using it as you draw the wrong cards constantly. And even if you get the right cards, you might want to play cards for another hero as they are struggling in their lane. I think you get the point. There are a lot of different situations to keep in mind when constructing a team and deck. Situations are unpredictable and there are many situations that happen at the same time. Therefore, adaptability in your team and deck is very important, and that is what makes this deck builder so much fun, as it's very unpredictable. Every match is just a whole mountain of unpredictable situations, and that makes each match feel to a degree unique in choices you make, and keeps the gameplay feel very fresh for a very long time. It also gives every match its own little story, so to say. Like one match, one of your heroes can be the absolute best that you did not see coming, while in the next match, it's an absolute stinker, making you regret picking that hero in the first place. One match and hero can survive what you thought to be a lost battle, and not only that, it managed to kill two opponent heroes, turning the battle completely in your favor. Many matches that I played were nail-biters, resulting in very close team battles near the end. Rarely I get very comfortable and won my games easily, but even those matches were fun thanks to the way the cards were implemented in the game and the small narratives that got created around my players. I would even argue that especially easier games were fun, as those were the games where I tried to push the envelope on the possibilities with the hero cards. And if you get too comfortable, I highly recommend playing with different heroes, as learning them is not difficult, as their gimmicks are kept fairly simple, but mastering them and matching them with others in your team, that requires effort and time. While the management aspect is present during the match, it becomes more noticeable in between matches, where you got to improve the team, individual players and prepare for the next match. Overall, the management aspect is fine, but as it mostly consists of finding ways to make certain numbers become bigger, it felt a little bit lackluster. Especially considering that most of the time I had no clue what many of these stats did or how to interpret them precisely. Like, let's say I increase the offense stat. Does that mean more damage? Better focus in offensive play? How does that balance with the other stats? And so on. On this aspect, the management felt a bit vague and ultimately a bit shallow, as it did not involve a similar amount of variables to consider as the core gameplay has. The before mentioned intermissions especially could have been a game changer here, again, not just for the story, but also gameplay wise. There are only a handful of intermissions, and those simulate the esports scene quite a bit, with live streams, post interviews, coach meetings and such. And you get to even pick dialogue options which determine rewards. But ultimately, even that felt very lackluster, especially in late game. There's a serious shortage in the terms of variations when it comes to these intermissions, and once you have seen the same one a couple of times, you start to skim through them, only looking for the best dialogue choices that gives the best rewards. There are no repercussions or other systems connected to your answers either. Something like a moral meter would be a nice addition here. You are a coach representing your team and players after all. You should act and say things carefully and properly, not to disrespect them or the opponent. Doing so should have repercussions, and as a coach it's your job to manage it and avoid it. Something like that could spice up the management aspect of the game, and on top of that add some story. Unfortunately, the biggest impact you will have during these intermissions as coach is the rule changes. Every so often, rules of the MOBA game are changed. Aspects of how money is earned when dragon fights start or how many rounds the game takes are determined here, and it's nice that you get a say in it. Still, I will not fully complain about the management. The game does offer enough input to shape the team the way you want. And despite these stats seemingly not meaning a lot of things, seeing numbers become bigger numbers is always quite entertaining. What I am going to complain a little bit about is that reaching the goal of the game felt very underwhelming. Maybe it's because I am more into different sports, but becoming the top league champion felt just underwhelming. The goal here is to reach the top league and win it, but once you did, there's no celebration moment with the team, special dialogue, rewards or anything. You get a victory screen followed up with "the next season is about to start" screen, and that just felt very underwhelming. The journey to it felt great, but the chest at the end of it was empty. To conclude, Esports Godfather is a banger of a game, when you solely look at the gameplay and after the rough start. In terms of its story and aspects that revolve around the core gameplay, there's a lot left to be desired. Management is there, but the impact feels very light or even non-existent. And while a game like this doesn't need a full-fledged story, it's still a potential the game skips out on. In the end, simulating the esports scene is what it tries to do, and it does a good job at it. For me, this game's gameplay is what makes it such a great game. Its weird mix of game genres works really well, to the point that I got a serious just one more game addiction for a couple of days straight. The switching between heroes and the way your deck is constructed offers many possibilities to change your experience, maintaining a fresh feeling for a long time. And the situations you encounter where you play cards is constantly changing as well, and requires of you more the ability to adapt rather than min-max a deck of cards. Now, it still might sound a bit weird to step into a game like this. Even if you like card games, this mix and the way gameplay works is not like traditional card games. Thankfully, the creators thought of this and released a demo, which I highly recommend checking out if you are remotely interested in this game. Even if you're not so high on cards, this game can still be for you. Again, it's a free demo worth checking out, and if you like it, just go for it. But in the end, I highly recommend playing this game.